All right. So tonight we're going to have I think a pretty good class as far as I think that this is probably of all the material that we've done as far as actual history is concerned. This is probably the most interesting. There's going to be a whole lot of. We're not going to be talking a whole lot of Bible, but this is related to the Bible. Because of we're not going to be talking doctrines or things like that, but we're going to talk about some of the origin of America and some of the stuff. So this is something that I think is really, really cool because probably all of us have been taught some very specific things about how America got started, and so. But those are wrong. We have, do you remember the first time that you found out that the first Thanksgiving meal had nothing to do with turkey? You were like, what is going on here? This has destroyed my life, and you find out too that they really were having a hard time for those first few times celebrating what we now call Thanksgiving with the American Indians. And so this is it. It's an interesting thing because the things that we're going to talk about are definitely based in science and in archaeology, geography. All these things have played out, and we're going to talk about them tonight. But all of this is evidenced. The things that we're going to talk about are evidence. Now we're going to be making some kind of jumps here and making some, some assumptions to some degree. But you're going to find that there's some solid evidence on what we're talking about just in general. All right, so let's jump right into this. We're just to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about. So this is the origin of America, but we're going to talk about Christopher Columbus some. We're going to talk about the flat earth stuff. That's coming back. The flat earth theory stuff's coming back. And we're going to be talking about that, describing what it is that they actually believed at that time. Because I know that everybody that taught me throughout probably even through high school said that Christopher Columbus had to basically go against his crew, fight the sailors to keep on going, because what were they afraid of? Going off the edge of the world, and that is just completely false. We're going to talk about stuff like that tonight. So I hope that you enjoy. We just need to jump right in because there are a lot of quotes that we're going to have tonight. So let's first start with the idea here of the pre-Columbian discovery of North America. Now, out of the book Traces of the Kingdom, it says this. This is like the very first thing that he mentions in a chapter associated with this. He says, "A curious tale is often told of the Reverend Morgan Jones, who was originally from Bassaleg, Monmouthshire, Wales, and an alumnus of Jesus College, Oxford University. Jones immigrated to North America and told the following story in 1669. He was traveling in what is now called South Carolina amongst the Doegs of the Tuscarora Nation on his way to Roanoke. When he was captured by Indians, they were about to put him to death when he muttered a few words in his native Welsh, and to his surprise, the Indians understood him, though with some difficulty. They then befriended him, Jones and his companions staying with them for 4 months. The Tuscaroras were known as the White Indians. Jones later, in 1685, swore an affidavit confirmed the event." And people have often looked at this story and said, this didn't happen. This is false. How could the Indians, how could they know Welsh? How could these American Indians have words that they know in Welsh? Well, the Welsh language is pre-Roman Celtic and is considered a relative of the language of ancient Britain before the Romans arrived in AD 43. The English language that we speak today came from the Anglo-Saxon into the Old English. And so when you think Anglo-Saxon, you kind of think Germanic. These are Germanic languages. Did anybody take German by chance? Man, yeah, German is really super easy. If you speak poor English, you speak great German. That is really how it happens. And so many of the words, maybe they're spelled differently, but they sound exactly the same. And that was one of the things that I teach you. I'm not going to give you a bunch of words here, but that was the first thing what my German teacher did day one. He said, you know how to say brown in German? It's brown. And then he just wrote out how it's written, how the letters spelled it out in German, and but you know it sounded the same. There are things that were very, very similar. And again, like I said, if you speak poor English, you know that you speak good German, because if the way that sentences are formed are the way that someone that maybe lives in Podunk County of any state is going to talk. And so it is quite interesting. But anyway, getting back into this, there's other languages that were used at the time. They used French when it came to diplomacy and courts. They used Latin in the established churches, and various Celtic dialects for the native British. Now, there's another legend of Prince Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney, led the last Norse Celtic Atlantic expedition, landing in what is now New England. In 1398, so that's a little bit before Columbus, Sir John Gunn, a member of the expedition, died at Westford, Massachusetts, where a memorial cut in the rock of his coat of arms can still be seen. So this predates Columbus by, like 100, almost 100 years. Vinland was the name given to an area of North America by the Norseman Leif Erikson about 1000 AD. In 1960, archaeological evidence of Norse settlements was found in, I can't even, L'Anse aux Meadows, the northern part of the island of Newfoundland. This proved the Vikings' pre-Columbian discovery of North America. So and this is something probably if you've studied any or just read any history outside of when you were in high school, you've probably run across some of this. It's been widely known that the Vikings did come to America way before Columbus ever did. We have archaeological evidence of those things. According to Barry Fell, the magnetic compass had been available since 300 BC. This would have allowed for primitive methods of sea travel. Remains of Roman shipwrecks have been found off the eastern coast of the Americas. The idea that Roman sailors could not sail away from land is obviously quite false. We have even, you probably have heard, I haven't watched this series, but I've heard about the series of Oak Island, and they have found like old Roman stuff there, and there's all kinds of things that people have said about it. I don't know what all they found. I don't know what all they're saying about Oak Island, but the fact of the matter is that the Romans even had the ability to sail across seas. And so the idea that they couldn't sail very far is just, completely in error. Let's see here. So going back, Barry Fell, he's a Harvard professor. He wrote a book called America BC, and he mentions that there are a number of sites both in North and South America where ancient artifacts from the Middle East and Europe have been found. Roman and earlier navigators knew the earth to be round, not flat. This was commonplace. How do we know that? Well, the circumference of the earth was measured 200 years before the birth of Christ by Eratosthenes. And that's what we're going to look at next. Eratosthenes of Cyrene. He lived 276 to 194 BC. He was a Greek. He was a mathematician, a geographer, an astronomer. You know him very well by something that he created. He is the one that created the longitude and latitude system that we still use today. It wasn't popular, I think, until about the 8th century, but he had done this, basically 10 centuries before. And so he invented the latitude and longitude system. He's remembered for being the first to have first known to have calculated the circumference of the earth. He also created a map of the world based on the available geographical knowledge of the era. After the destruction of Athens and Alexandria, many ancient works were lost for all time, but from what evidence remains, we know these ancient sea peoples had much more knowledge than is normally credited to them. I think about some of the stuff that we're going to be discussing tonight, and how we have discounted a whole lot of people throughout time. And we talk about, look at the Romans. The Romans are the first ones to have, running water coming into houses and things like that. But once we excavated Ur, where Abraham lived, one of the very first major characters in the Bible, guess what they had in Ur? They had running water coming to individual houses. So this is not crazy stuff. And just the fact that we have discounted people throughout time, saying, we have, we're so smart these days, our technology is so good, and we think, we do so much better than the people back and years ago. That's really just simply not the case. There's a whole lot of ingenuity that is going on throughout time. Eratosthenes, he studied in Alexandria and later in Athens. In 236 BC, he was appointed by Ptolemy III as a librarian of the Alexandrian library, succeeding the first librarian, Zenodotos. Made several contributions to math and science. He was a friend of, you'll know this guy, Archimedes. He was a friend of Archimedes. And around 255 BC, invented the armillary sphere, widely used until the invention of the orrery, a mechanical device that illustrates the relative positions and motions of the planets and moons in the solar system in a heliocentric model. So, just the way that the planets rotate and stuff. So, moving on, let's talk about the flat Earth for a little bit. Now, without going into a whole lot of detail, because we are 5 slides into 24 slides. We know that the Bible teaches specifically that the earth is spherical. We know that from Job, talking about him that sits upon the circle of the earth. So we know that this was done. But the British Celtic Church also taught that the earth was round. And this was a fact that was known to Celtic sailors. The first author to present a flat earth account in detail was Washington Irving. So you might want to take a guess when he lived. I'll tell you when he died. He died 1859. So many years, you're looking 400 plus years, or almost 400 years, after Christopher Columbus, that he died. So he's the first time that you see the flat earth theory being described. Pre-Columbian Native American legends tell of visitors from a strange land with strange powers. Now, if you think about this, if you go back to the 1st century, what happened with Christians? They had, the gift of the Holy Spirit, were able to go out and perform miracles. Is this a reference of the Native Americans to Christians coming over and being able to perform miracles? Sailors knew the earth was round, for when land disappears on or another boat approaches, it is the highest point that is seen first, and disappears last because the Earth's curvature hides the lower parts. I don't know if you've ever been out in the ocean, and or if you've even the Great Lakes. You can do this on the Great Lakes because you can't see land on the other side. It looks like the ocean there. But you know what? If the Earth was flat, what could you technically do when you're looking across the Great Lakes? You ought to be able to see land, right? But you can't. Why? Because the curvature of the Earth. So this is, I think easily disputed here. But they knew this. They knew that the Earth had to be round because as a ship would sail off, it was the top of the mast that you would see last. And if they were sailing towards you, it was the top that you'd see first because everything else was hidden behind the curvature. The legend of Columbus sailors living in fear of falling off of a flat earth at the very edge of the sea grew from Irving's history. Matter of fact, it was denominations, particularly the Anglican Church in England. They had some liberal theology already. They eagerly accepted stories just like this. And two English atheists in the 1800s, John Draper and Andrew D. White, promoted even further the story of Columbus and a flat earth. The idea that the early pre-Reformation church taught that the earth was flat is a fabrication by anti-Christian humanists. And why would anybody want to do that? Well, if you're an anti-Christian, you want to show, oh, well, look, these Christians, what they're teaching. They were ridiculously teaching flat earth. They don't know what they're talking about. You shouldn't listen to them. That's kind of the thought process. Samuel Eliot Morison, an expert on Columbus who has opposed the flat earth story as misleading and mischievous nonsense, described it as one of the most popular Columbian myths. He had a book called Admiral of the Ocean Sea, A Life of Christopher Columbus. It came out in 1942. The Celts and the British sailors had been reaching North America by way of Greenland, across to Newfoundland for centuries prior to Columbus reaching America in 1492. That is a reference from his book there. Vikings, he also mentioned, had been making the same perilous journey from about AD 1000. And in 982, the Norsemen who had settled in Iceland found America under Eric the Red. And by 1003, Thorvald was traveling to the Carolinas where settlements were established. Its existence was published in 1607 by Adam of Bremen, who wrote, and here you go, here's the quote, "The king also made mention of another region discovered in the northern ocean, which had been visited by many people and was called Vineland, because grapes and produce a very good wine, grapes that produce a very good wine grew there spontaneously. Corn also grows there without sowing in great abundance. We know this not by fabulous hearsay, but from authentic accounts furnished by Danes." And so the Vikings said, look, they call themselves the Danes. They knew, look, we know because some of our own have been there, and they described this very thing. They described a place where these things were bountiful, and they're describing America. By 1347, legates and bishops from the Roman Catholic Church were discouraging further exploration and contact with America to prevent the discovery of a sea route to India, and so damaged the trade of the Levant, or the Orient. Originally, this is the area of the Mediterranean that goes east of Italy. And so this is the Orient, this part of the world that they're trying to keep trade with. So the Catholic Church, they're like, hey, we want to keep our trade routes good. We don't want to mess things up for our economy. So what do? You go ahead and you tell people, don't go there. This is bad. Don't go there. In Traces of the Kingdom, it says, in 1453, Constantinople fell to the Muslims, to which the Romish Church responded by expelling Muslims and Jews from Spain. The fall of the Roman Empire resulted in the loss of the lucrative Levant trade, which resulted in the Romish Church lifting its objections to westward exploration. The removal of this ban was followed by Columbus discovering America in 1492 and da Gama's opening of the sea route to India. On instructions from Ferdinand and his queen Isabella, Columbus would seek to find an alternative route to the Spice Islands to avoid Muslim pirates. On at least 3 occasions before changing her mind, Isabella rejected Columbus's plan to reach the Indies by sailing west. And after 2 years of him, trying to convince, she finally agreed. So early sea travel was really dangerous at the time. Death was common when people went to sea. There were the idea that small boats would sink was a very common thing. Of course, we know now from science that there can be rogue waves that would have just completely overtaken a small vessel in those days that wouldn't have had any hope of, doing anything but really capsizing, being broken to pieces. Also, boats could be lost. Illness, of course, was another thing. We all heard this one. Illness was a big thing for sailors. And the number one cause of illness was what? Scurvy. Yeah. So after 2 or 3 weeks without fresh fruits and vegetables, people would start to develop scurvy. And at the time, their diet consisted of salted pork, beef, and biscuits when the fruit ran out. So, that kind of seemed like, being a meat guy. I like meat. Everybody, every guy likes meat, I think. But, when you think about that, if that's the only thing you eat over and over and over again, that has got to get really bad, really boring, really fast. But then also you add in the scurvy. You're going to start getting sick, which, for those of you who can't remember what scurvy is like, you start losing your teeth, you get these like rashes on your skin, and you're depleted of energy and things like that. Moving forward, St. Brendan of Clonfert. I have no idea if that's the way you say it. There are several names in which, if you know that I'm saying it wrong, please tell me afterward. But I'm probably going to butcher at least half the names from here on out. But St. Brendan was called the Navigator. He was an early Irish monk, famous for his semi-legendary journey to the Isle of the Blessed, or the Americas. In his log, he recorded huge sea monsters that went under his boat. So I'm guessing, he found some whales. Also described mountains of sea crystals, icebergs, several legends record Celtic adventures from Ireland reaching America, and that such legends may be based on truth is confirmed by American archaeology. In the 8th century, an Irish monk named Vigil was accused by the Pope, Pope Zachary, of having taught heresies on the Antipodes. The Antipodes is that any place on earth has its antipodal point. That is, the region on the earth's surface which is diametrically opposite to it. 2 points which at antipodal to one another are connected by a straight line through the center of the earth. The teaching of the Antipodes also teaches the earth is spherical. So I'm going to break it down really simply. It's like if you had like a basketball, any ball, and you were to just draw a line through the center of it. If you put your finger on any point of that ball, there is an exact opposite of that end. That's what happens when you have a sphere. There is an antipodal point. And so that's what's being described here. And but this guy, he's called by the Pope that he's teaching heresies, right? Early Christians found their way to America and left their inscriptions cut in stone. Several inscriptions have been found in New England. In the 5th century AD, Chinese and Japanese accounts tell us they were trading with America, which they named Fusong, at a distance, they said, at about 7,000 miles. The Chinese presence in America at this date is also confirmed by archaeology. So, seeing that this before Columbus has come, the Chinese even know that the Americas exist. They just call it something different, In the 5th century, moving on. We also know from archaeology that the Celts, Iberians, Egyptians, Libyans, and Phoenicians visited the Americas. 1 Kings 10:22 reads, "For the king had merchant ships at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the merchant ships came bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. King Hiram was king of Phoenicia. The Phoenicians were not only capable of going to the Americas, but did so as confirmed by archaeology." So I find that very interesting. I don't know if this is an exact reference to that in the Bible, but at least we know that the Phoenicians had some time before Columbus and really the Native Americans are a development of these people coming back and forth. Let's look at this next guy, this Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, in his book, the Bibliotheca Historica, wrote this: "Over against Africa lies a very great island in the vast ocean, many days' sail from Libya westward. The soil is very fruitful. It is diversified with mountains and pleasant vales, and the towns are adorned with stately buildings." So if you go back and you look at what is happening in that time, you think about South America. There's lots of ruins and stuff there that the Native Americans had built. Now keep thinking, how did that get there? How did those things get there? The traditional view is that the first American settlers came via a land bridge over the Bering Sea from Asia, but this is now questioned. Dr. Dennis Stanford theorized, based on discoveries indicating that the ancient indigenous people were culturally far more than the Neolithic tribes of France, Spain, and Ireland, than the Asian people whom scientists had previously thought to be the sole prehistoric settlers of North America. So we're quoting people who don't believe in the Bible, so we're mentioning things like Neolithic and prehistoric. There is no prehistory. We have history from the beginning in the Bible. But just so you know, we're quoting these guys. This is what they're saying about what is going on and what happened with the origin of America. All right, so Stanford also points out that although modern Native Americans have DNA similar to that of Asians, they also carry some variants that are found only in European people. This genetic input, he argued, could only be explained by accepting that Stone Age people were capable of sailing ocean-going boats. And so when Columbus discovered America, the natives had become more primitive and barbarous from their former state. That just shows a digression. And I know that sometimes people go, well, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. People don't digress like that. And I hate to point this out, given where we are, but there are people in West Virginia that go back in a holler and, are marrying siblings. I hate to discuss that, but is that a digression? Yeah. If you kept doing that, would you digress further and further? If you don't share knowledge, that's one of the big things about teaching children. If you teach children the things that think about anything that you've learned how to do from someone teaching you. if people have stopped learning how to do those things. I mean, some of these ancient buildings like the Aztecs, wasn't the Aztecs that their brickwork was so good that you can't even fit a razor blade to this day in some of those joints because they fit them together so well. And people look at the natives in that area and go, how could they have done that? Well, it's because they digressed. They separated themselves and became tribal units instead of a civilization of greater people. Why did that happen? I don't know. But if you separate yourself from other people, you are going to digress. That's just the fact of the matter. Think about the fact that if you go into the Amazon, there are people who just are shocked when they see modern technology. But how did they get there? And they're not, really far away from where there is civilization, right? And yet they have chosen to be in this one spot. And of course, they have digressed into this tribal pattern. When Columbus rediscovered America, the natives had become into that state that we've been talking about. The archaeology of earlier civilizations remained unexplained and ignored, from which the Native Americans were descended. Pope Julius II described in 1512 the new continent's inhabitants as sinful Babylonians who had escaped the flood. So that's an interesting thing. Has no bearing really on what we're talking about, but I think it's really interesting that that's what they were called. All right, Baron Alexander von Humboldt. He has a lot of good things here that we're going to look at really quickly. He was lived from 1769 to 1859. Was born into a wealthy family in Berlin. Charles Darwin said of him, he was the greatest traveling scientist who ever lived. I've always admired him. Now I worship him. Humboldt is widely respected as one of the founders of modern geography. Thomas Jefferson said, I considered him the most important scientist whom I have met. All right, so Humboldt's views of America remain of great interest. He makes some very interesting, he has some very interesting thoughts here on some things, especially since he had little consideration for the abilities of people to sell at that time. He thought that was not, ancient sea travelers was not a thing. He visited the native peoples who were still in touch with the past, and he's one of the major sources, really, in the modern historians adopting the theory that Columbus discovered the New World. So he's, a few hundred years after Columbus has rediscovered America, he starts making some observations, and we're going to look at these. He wrote in the description of the monuments of America. This is looking at these, temples and stuff that the Aztecs have built, and he looks at them and he's describing them. This is all keep that in your mind as we're reading this. It says, I have attempted to keep an equal tenor between the two methods followed by those learned men who have investigated the monuments, the languages, and the traditions of nations. Some, allured by splendid hypotheses built on very unstable foundations, have drawn general consequence from a small number of solitary facts. They have discovered Chinese and Egyptian colonies in America, recognized Celtic dialects and the Phoenician alphabet, and while we are ignorant whether the Ossi, the Goths, or the Celts are nations immigrated from Asia, have given decisive opinion on the origin of all the hordes of the new continent. So they're saying, look, we have found all these civilizations already here. Question, did we hear this in high school? This is not what we heard in our history classes, is it? But this was written plenty of time, I'm pretty sure, everybody here was born after 1800, right? So, this was written well within our sphere, right, Faye? That's right. All that being said, says, others have accumulated materials without generalizing an idea, which is a method as sterile in tracing the history of a nation, as in delineating the different branches of a natural philosophy. May I have been happy enough to avoid the errors which I have now pointed out. A small number of nations far distant from each other, the Etruscans, the Egyptians, the people of Tibet, and the Aztecs, exhibit striking analogies in their buildings, their religious institutions, and their division of time, their cycles of regeneration, and the mystic notions. It is the duty of the historian to point out these analogies, which are as difficult to explain as relations that exist between Sanskrit, the Persian, the Greek, and the languages of German origin. Humboldt continued, the works of the first inhabitants of Mexico hold an intermediary place between those of the Scythian tribes and the ancient monuments of the Hindustan. He states a slight resemblance between the Kalantika of the heads of Isis and the Mexican headdress. The pyramids with terraces like those of Fayum and the Saqqara, the frequent use of the hieroglyphical painting, the 5 complementary days added to the end of the Mexican year, similar to the epigomena of the Memphian, the Egyptian year, exhibit very remarkable points of comparison between the people of the old and new continents. So, they're saying, look, there's a comparison. You got to admit, there's a comparison. You've got people that are separated by oceans, and they are using the same calendar. Like, how does that work, right? Describing the Great Pyramid of Cholula, Mexico, Humboldt wrote, it is impossible to read the descriptions which Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus have left us of the temple of Jupiter Belus without being struck with the resemblance of that Babylonian monument to the Teocallis of Anahu. The pyramids of Mexico and Egypt likewise are aligned on the cardinal points, just like in Egypt. So they align with north, south, east, and west. And so not only in Egypt do they align north, south, east, and west. When you look at these things, what are they doing? They're aligning them the same exact way. That's pretty amazing, right? That's pretty amazing. That's showing some consistency. We cannot avoid being struck with the great resemblance which we observe between the Mexican manuscripts preserved at Velletri, at Rome, at Bologna, at Vienna, and at Mexico. They seem at first sight to be copies of each other. Humboldt, on the origins of the Kingdom of Guatemala, said this: the inhabitants of the, I think this is Texaipan, had preserved traditions that went back to the epoch of a great deluge, after which their ancestors, so what's the great deluge? The flood. All right, so led by a chief called Votan, and had come from a country lying toward the north, in the village of Teopia, there still existed in the 16th century descendants of the family of Votan, or Votan, for these two names are the same. The Toltecs and the Aztecs, not having the 4 consonants D, B, R, S in their language, they who have studied the history of the Scandinavian nations in the heroic times must be struck at finding in Mexico a name which recalls that of Woden or Odin, who reigned among the Scythians, and whose race, according to the very remarkable assertion of Bede, gave kings to a great number of nations. Okay, so I'm going to pause right here and kind of explain our thought processes of what we should be thinking right now. So there are all these similarities between nations. Now, we have in the past talked about the flood on a few different occasions, and we've talked even that there are other flood stories, and we've just even seen another flood story. Now, what does that mean? Do you remember what we made the assertion there? If there are all these flood stories, what does that mean?
Universal.
There was a universal flood, and yes, there were people that throughout time heard it and then told it in their own way. You know, the Babylonians had a flood story. Remember, they had the Gilgamesh epic. And maybe you probably studied that too in school. And the Gilgamesh epic had them getting on an ark that was shaped like a cube. You know, it was a big box. It was a cube. And they get in it and they get out. And it's a terrible idea. A cube would have just rolled around in the ocean and all the water. But yeah, so all that being said, it's a copy. It's a counterfeit of the original. And so it's just showing that all of these nations have borrowed from other peoples. So even the thought of Odin, you know, a Scandinavian thing, you know, Vikings, Odin, right? Being seen in these Native American things. All right, continuing on. Let's see here. All right. As Odin and Buddha, according to the learned researchers of Sir William Jones, are probably the same person, it is curious to see the names of Budvar, Woden's dog, Wednesday, and Wotan denote in India and Scandinavia and Mexico a day of a small period. The Woden, or the Woden of the Japanese was grandson of that illustrious old man who, at the time of the Great Deluge, in which the greater part of the human race perished, was saved on a raft with his family, right? You know, so, you know, this is things that have been illustrated throughout time. Again, people are copying the story of the flood, but how did they get that? How did they get that? They heard it from somewhere. They heard it from somewhere. Regarding the sun god, I don't even know how to pronounce this. Tonatiuh? What do you think? I don't know.
That sounded weird.
What?
What you said.
Tonatiuh, I don't know.
Yeah.
The Tonatiuh of the Mexicans appears also to be identical with the Krishna of the Hindus, recorded in the Bhagavata Purana, and with the Mithras of the Persians. All right, so all of this being said, you know, we're just showing that they're before the U.S. even, you know, we're thinking the U.S., we're thinking about America. We think about America being a melting pot, right? We're all, you know, coming together, and we all, you know, but that was already happening. All these different peoples were coming from different places to America at different times, and the evidence of that is being shown in Native American culture and also in archaeology. And I tell you what, if you don't look at this lesson and get excited to some degree, I've done a terrible job, because I think this is really neat stuff. So why does this matter? That's the question. Why does this matter? You know, and this comes from Traces of the Kingdom. There is no reason, in light of ancient and modern research, to dismiss the earliest settlers in the Americas from being part of the great dispersion from Babel found in Genesis chapters 10 and 11. The Table of Nations, and these ancient nations in America had opportunity to hear the gospel preached. And so that kind of expands our view a little bit. If you think about the fact that early Christians, maybe even as early, you know, the idea that we saw that these people came strange lands with being able to perform strange acts. The idea of maybe even miracles having been in the Americas. That's a real possibility. And the idea that there's several other things that we could have added to this. Because sometimes people will say, well, Rome wasn't capable, they didn't have big ships, but we have actually uncovered these massive ships that they have made. There's even this one ship, I think it was over 180 feet long, and in the middle of it was a marble slab in the middle of this boat, and it was heated so that you could heat the boat. So it's just interesting stuff. They had these boats that they would use to shuttle grain to places. So look, this could have been done very easily, and the evidence from archaeology is that it did happen. Now sometimes people go, well, what was the driving force for Columbus and trying to come to America? What happened there? Well, he's trying to find a trade route to get around these Muslim pirates, and so he kept wanting to sail west because he thought you could just kind of go around to the other side, just sail around the globe, which again, that just shows you that he thought the earth was round. He thought I could just circle the globe, so they did that, but then they found, America, and they rediscovered America. Well, what that did for Columbus is that made him very rich, and people are like, why would he do that? It was just to explore stuff. No, once he landed, he was going to make a bunch of money, so lots of interesting stuff. Anybody have any comments? I don't know I'll be able to answer any questions, but anybody have any of those or comments that they'd like to make?
I have one question.
Okay.
If the earth was flat, was there any other shape that was also thought of like square or rectangle?
Yeah,
It can't just be flat.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of different things. Like there's, according to maps, it's kind of silly, but you lay out a map in a rectangle to be able to just see, the earth as it's sprawled out, and people go, well, see, that's why they thought the earth was flat. And I'm like, because it's a piece of paper, I don't know, what.
I wonder if there was ever mention of, I've never heard of anything, but
Yeah.
that could be another shape too.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've seen the square shape. I've seen the rectangle shape. I've seen a oblong shape, like an oval. But yeah, no, I don't know. And this flat Earth stuff is coming back, and it's so unintelligent. I don't know what to say about it. I was talking with somebody one time, and they were recently, and they were like, I didn't even I think Philip was the first one to say something to me, and I was like, no, that's crazy. People, and then a couple of weeks later, somebody says something about flat Earth to me. I was like, oh, what? Are you kidding me? And
big time. There's
yeah,
people.
And you even understand gravity at all? I don't, I'm not a big science guy, but I understand. If you remember, the experiment that they did, showing centrifugal force, that if you take that bicycle wheel and you spin it, holding on to it with a piece of rope, you go, oh, what's going to happen? It's just going to spin. But if you turn it sideways and you spin it and you hold it by that same rope, it still spins sideways. Why? It's because of that, force that's going on, that motion, that circular motion. What's going on with the Earth? It is rotating. That's it's got its own axis point. We're rotating around the sun, and it's pretty interesting stuff. I've seen a lot of people talking about the whole did we actually land on the moon stuff, and and look, none of that really matters, but like when God says that the earth's round, well, then the earth's round.
Yeah. So how can a person stand in one spot if you're going 1,000 some miles an hour? If the earth is spinning that fast,
Right.
How can you stand still? Try that on a merry-go-round.
Yeah.
Well, you got gravity.
Right. You got gravity holding you in place.
You got specific gravity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's interesting that people have lots of crazy thoughts, but
There's a pilot. He said that if the earth was flat, you take off from this airport and you go to here, you would be a flat path. You get up, you go there. Because of the earth,
Curvature.
you have to have a flight path in to go over the earth, go back down into it. And he said it's just common sense.
yeah. Well, I mean, you can see that now. I mean, I always thought it was hilarious how, like, growing up in Chattanooga, they would it'd say you go up to Rock City and they're like, you can see 7 states from right here. I'm like, there is no way you could see 7 states from right here. No way. It's like, that is anti-scientific. And of course, later on, I found out, that, maybe they're thinking you can look out and see the top of the atmosphere of 7 states. I don't know how you do that, but it's just ridiculous. But there's just no way. Like, I don't know how, it's like what, 20 miles or something like that? Like, after 20 miles, like, you just can't see something anymore. It's like, I can stand on a tall mountain, but after so far, I can't see any further, Just like if you go to the ocean and one of the coolest things to do when you've never been to the ocean is to watch those ships go out to sea. And you can watch them, and then you watch them for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on how fast the boat is. And you'll watch them, and they'll just keep going, and then all of a sudden, like, you can't see it anymore. So, or what about the sun and the sunset? You go to the ocean, you watch the sunrise or the sunset, depending on where you're, it's just going to pop out of nowhere.
Shadow proves that.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Anybody else? I'm certainly not the science teacher, guys, but
Bill Nye.
no.
Science guy.
No, I like reason. I'm not Bill Nye. Yeah, I laughed a whole lot when he was like talking about the mask thing, like, oh, you need to wear a mask. Did you see that?
Yeah.
And he was like, masks work. They're gonna keep. And then like he was like held a candle up, and then he started to blow, and he's like, I can't blow this candle. And I watched this like soccer mom. She's like, like maybe. And I was like, maybe it's okay. He's just a weakling. I mean, he looks weakling, but yeah, no, we got to stand to reason. So, anybody else? All right, well, Brother Philip, why don't you lead us in prayer?
Father, we thank you for another opportunity to come out to discuss the church. We're thankful, Father, for history. We're thankful that we can know that you are who you said you are. We're thankful, Father, for the opportunities that we have to gather and discuss these things. We thank you for all things, most of all for your Son, Jesus. It's his name we pray. Amen.
Yeah.